Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, we continue our series, Hollywood 1928. We're screening a marvelous comedy, Speedy, starring Harold Lloyd, who's at the peak of his fame and skill as a physical comedian. We'll be talking about that and other things, including the fact that much of this was shot on location in New York, including in New York with Babe Ruth, after today's screening. Joining us once again on City Cinematheque will be noted critic and writer Geoffrey O'Brien, a notable expert on American cinema. Now enjoy the New York City of 1928 in Speedy. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed this opportunity to spend a very fast hour and a half in the New York of almost 100 years ago in Speedy. This is an example of a film that is at the peak of the skills of its star, who's also its producer, but it's also the peak of the language of silent cinema, which will disappear in the coming years. To talk about that and a bunch of other things, it's always a pleasure to welcome back to City Cinematheque our good friend, Geoffrey O'Brien. Geoffrey is a distinguished writer and critic, a poet. He has written for many publications. People have read him in the New York Review of Books, for example. And recently he published The Arabian Nights of 1934, very much inspired by the pre-code sound films whose life comes to an end when that code goes into place in 1934. So Geoffrey, let's reel back a little bit to just before those pre-code sound films, to this film. So let's just start with Harold Lloyd himself. Now, he's actually the #1 box office comic at this particular point. How do you see him in relationship to the other two big guys that people think of and perhaps have seen more of these days, Chaplin and Keaton? Then we'll get into the film.
Yeah, well, I mean, Lloyd at his peak was more popular than either of them.
Right,
I mean, certainly more so than Buster Keaton. He made a vast number of movies in a 10-year period. Well, he started out as a kind of Chaplin imitator, playing a character named Lonesome Luke, and then he discovered the glasses that he wears in all of his succeeding movies, and then from that he makes a career, and the evolution of his career is incredible because in 10 years from say 1918 to 1928 he goes from one reel shorts that are sometimes very funny, but they're more or less in the Max Sennett hit him over the head style.
Right.
And by the time you get to Speedy, it's become a science of gag construction that is really quite extraordinary, and I don't think was surpassed by Chaplin or Keaton just on the level of sheer constant invention.
Oh, absolutely. So, but as a persona, how would you compare and contrast him with, because like them, there's a Chaplin film, there's a Keaton film, there's a Lloyd film. Whatever the name of the character is, it's really the same character.
Well, he was a different kind of performer. He didn't come out of a vaudeville tradition like Chaplin or Keaton. He didn't have that upbringing of clowning and that kind of mastery. He learned it, but he learned it studiously. Yeah. He really was more of an actor. His first professional appearance at the age of 10 was in a production of Macbeth as Banquo's son. His mother raised him on Shakespeare, and he wanted to be a straight actor, but he somehow ended up with Hal Roach making these one-reel comedies and was extremely successful pretty much from the get-go. But his persona is, it lacks that kind of mythic dimension that you can find in Chaplin or Keaton, and the melancholy that you can also find in them. he's more cheerful, he's a go-getter, he's resourceful, and even when he's down, he's always confident that he's going to get up again. So, you know, he was a kind of all-American hero in a way, and very much the top movie star, I think you could say, really,
Well, you
at
know,
that point in his career.
it's worth saying that you know, he brought this whole set of his team, because again, each one of these people had teams they worked with of technicians and, you know, et cetera. They came and shot a lot in New York. We can talk about that and settings in a minute or so. But while they were there, you know, we actually have the stills of them on set. And, you know, Lloyd drew thousands of people.
And they're in the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And they used them in the,
Yeah.
you know, they used them in the movie. But the magnitude of, you know, and it was deep press coverage at the time. Harold Lloyd is coming to New York to make, you know, to
Yeah, he
make
gets a cold, and it's a newspaper headline.
That Harold Lloyd is shut down for a week, and you could probably read about it in one of those newspapers you would read from a newsie,
Yeah.
which is the kind of thing, you know, that he portrays about New York, you know,
Yeah.
unto itself. So there's this lightness about him. I mean, a cheerfulness,
Yeah.
and an optimism.
But he really, I mean, the other thing that strikes me about him is something that Hal Roach once said, that Harold Lloyd was not a comedian. He was an actor who played a comedian. And I think it's true in the sense that it's very hard to imagine Harold Lloyd just by himself
Right.
being funny.
Right.
He's funny in reaction to all of this funny stuff that's going on.
Right.
Whereas Chaplin or Keaton could easily be funny just by themselves.
Well, yeah, and they come, you know, I mean, he originally is with the one reelers, but they come out of the vaudeville theatrical tradition of the sketch, you know, and of the bit and of that. Whereas, as you pointed out, I mean, you know, Mom has him in Macbeth, you know, from the get go. Yeah, and also it's worth pointing out that when the crash has not happened, I mean, this is a film made in 27, 28. This is America riding high on a sense of its own, a modernity, and it's, you know, New York, the greatest and most modern city in the world. And there's a lot of, you know, showing off of that. At the same time, the film respects the old neighborhood. And
Yeah. But, I mean, Lloyd, I mean, it's a simple enough story. I mean, the old guy has the horse-drawn carriage, which is under threat from these more or less crooked capitalists who want to cheat him. And Harold can't keep a job, but he's convinced that he's going to be a big man someday. And then he saves the day by noticing a newspaper item and thinking like a financier. He realizes, and he alters the number on the proposed offering price, and then in the end of the movie, he ups the price again to $100,000.
Right.
So he's on his way to being a rich man, which of course Harold Lloyd.
And we should point out that this is the person whose life was unproblematic because he handled his money and everything extremely.
Unlike Buster Keaton,
Right.
he kept every dollar and built it into a very, very comfortable life.
Absolutely, and he didn't get locked out of the country like.
And he
like
retained control over his old movies,
Right.
And all of that.
So there is, again, this comes back to this whole notion of just in this particular silent period, those people, and it is all three of these major comedians who are examples of that, who were able to essentially build their own production units in partnership with people, but they really had, for this almost 10-year period, they had this control over everything that, you know, Keaton is the classic case of, you know, when he gets the contract with MGM, He goes into conflict. That was a romance that was doomed from the very beginning. And Keaton even said it's the worst mistake I ever made. Whereas Lloyd, who had made it into sound film, but again, by then he's so famous. He's done
and
everything.
it didn't work for him because what he was doing in film really, it's not something easily transferred to the talkies.
Talk about. I think that's a great. I think that's a great point.
Speedy,
Let's stay with Speedy.
Speedy. I mean, the title says it all. It's an incredibly fast film. It's incredibly fast because the exposition is lightning quick. He's conveying things with a single fast image, which in a sound film would have to be strung out a little bit.
Right.
All of those exposition scenes where they're talking about the price and all of the negotiating and so on, and that I can just imagine how that would have been in an early sound film. It would not have really lent itself to his kind of comedy, whereas he leaves all that stuff out. He just has the bare minimum of necessary exposition to hold this basically very simple story together. And then the rest of it is all just mostly visual invention. Right. And it's so quick. And I watching it more than once, I'm constantly finding details that I missed the first go-around because there's just so much.
I'm going to make a general point, and then we'll come back into those specific ones. My general point is that this is another one of those films that, through the lens of Harold Lloyd's comedy, we really see what silent film can do as silent film. And the other films, I think, in this series illustrate that in very different ways. But then let's just jump back into this. So there's an incredible density of invention in this film, as you were remarking.
Yeah. Well, in other words, you could take any 3-minute segment. I mean, when he's really going in high gear.
Yeah.
Especially the whole middle section, the cab driving section, is just a string of gags. It never stops.
Right.
And it goes on for about at least 20 minutes.
Right. Absolutely.
And all of that, it's being done also with incredible editing.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, just to study the cuts, and especially because they're working with footage shot in New York and L.A. and combining it into these incredibly
let's just stop for 1 minute, and I'll give a little bit of the background on that because you're making, I think, an important point that while they shot so much, and we can talk about the authenticity of the footage and how certain locations are used. The film was shot in New York. It was shot on the streets of Southern California. And he built a New York set in Westwood. So actually this seamless, Speedy concoction is something that is seamlessly edited from 3 distinct, production experiences. Essentially a studio village, streets of Southern California, and New York. And unless you're really watching for all of that, it's so beautifully concocted that the story world just says New York, New York, New York.
It's an incredible thing. I mean, there's a book called Silent Visions that's all devoted to Harold Lloyd's locations, and it devotes, I think, 100 pages to mapping the complexity of the location shooting in Speedy. That is how elaborately that movie was put together.
And maybe it's a moment. There is a delightful and very informative documentary, about 30 minutes long, by Bruce Goldstein.
Wonderful.
And it's available, for those who get the DVD or on the Criterion channel. I don't know where else, but it also chronicles much
in
of
the
this.
footsteps of Speedy. Yeah, no, it's great because he compares. This is how it was in '28. This is how it is now. Of course, now is already 10 years ago, and the city has changed yet again. But but it's a marvelous film, and it really is very enlightening. about the production process.
Right. Well, so let's come back to some of this in invention and on that. So what are some of the ways you
Well, just to take one example of the many, after the long sequence where they go to Coney Island, and they go up, they go down, they go up, and then finally he loses all his money because the dog upsets the table with all the statuary and he has to pay the vendor. So he and his girlfriend are sitting there all sad. They have no money to get home with, and he's sitting there, and he tucks his leg under him. And then a well-dressed woman walks by and looks at him, and to her and to us in the shot, it looks as if he has one leg. And he has his hat in his lap, so she assumes he's a beggar asking for money, and she goes over, very concerned, and drops money in the hat. And then he suddenly notices this, and as if he didn't know where it came from. Oh, look, there's money. And he turns to his girlfriend. He's ecstatic, and he stands up. And then the woman turns around and sees him, and is irate, walks back, takes the money out. And then he's down again. But the whole thing, if it takes 20 seconds, I'd be surprised. I mean, really, the whole movie is more or less at that pace. When it slows down, it doesn't slow down much. I mean, you could say it slows down to give us a little documentary of Luna Park, Coney Island.
Right, yeah.
Which is invaluable footage anyway. Well, of course, some of it is actually at Ocean Park in California, but that's, you know.
Yeah. But again, that's the advantage of the kind of simple plotting that he uses. This is like, okay, he's the soda jerk in this exposition. Then he's the guy out with the taxi, and then he's the savior. I mean, he's going to take over, and he's going to protect Pop, and that constitutes under an hour and a half. But in each one of those blocks of story material, there's just so much detailed incident.
Well, again, he builds. I mean, the first act with the soda jerk routine, which is very funny, especially when he bites off half the pretzel to represent the number 3, to signal to his colleagues that that's the score of the ball game. And then he goes running up the street with the bouquet, and again, he wants to know the ball score, so he climbs up on top of a taxi. And he's looking, and then somebody opens and closes the door and destroys the bouquet, so he loses his job. Again, a scene that probably, is I don't know, 50 seconds?
Yeah, but there's so much that happens, and by the way, there's so many camera angles. I mean, because he's so agile, but the great editing is so invisible. We're not even noticing how it's capturing his agility in those.
Which is why you also don't notice any of the mismatches between different locations, or even the fact that there's a stunt driver driving the wagon in the final chase. Because everything is just rolling along much too fast for that kind of thing. And yet there's no confusion about exposition. I mean, I think the genius of it is the clarity of everything. It's all worked out so perfectly that you're never lost. You know exactly what's going on with a minimum of titles. I mean, there are really very few titles in the film. And it doesn't throw in all of those silly comedy titles that they sometimes did in that era. Little jokey asides. It's just what you need to get the crucial plot points, of which there are very few.
But you can then get to a location, and as the late Gerald Mast, who wrote The Comic Mind, talks about, one of the issues with these people who come out of the gag tradition but then know how to use gags within a story is that you get to Coney Island, and then you explore that environment, and the phrase that Mast always uses, you riff on it. What could happen? And you find all of this, invention in that. I mean, again, as you were pointing out, there's the whole the whole joke about the stripes on his back.
Ah, yeah.
You know,
Preceded by the joke about the polka dot reflections from the umbrella.
Absolutely.
He's trying to brush off the reflections, and he leans back on the fence, which says wet paint, and then he's got the stripes down his back.
Absolutely. And then he thinks people are laughing because when he goes to the distorted mirror, it's the distorted mirror,
Yeah, yeah.
and because that. And so, you know, it's like one visual joke, as you were saying, built on and constructed on another.
Well, that's one of his characteristic things of not realizing that the joke is on him.
Right.
And being a little bit slow on the uptake, even though he's so self-confident and sure of himself.
Well, and that's also the way in which the film, which loves him, okay, but at the same time that it loves him, it's not against having a comically ironic perspective on him and some of his, you know, charming foibles. For example, when he is encountered, and you can take up my thing here, his encounter with the detectives when he's a taxi driver.
Oh, well, that's a wonderful scene, yeah. He's already gotten a ticket.
Right.
And he's also already had two cops in the car who don't pay the fare.
Right.
And show their badges. No, we don't have to pay.
Yeah.
So then two detectives get in the car to say, oh, we're chasing a guy. You can go as fast as you like as long as we're in the back. And then instantly they see the guy they're looking for and duck out, and a different passenger gets in, but he doesn't see that. And then he sees the same cop who gave him the ticket, and he's mocking him as he speeds down the street, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, and that, in one sense, that's the difference between Lloyd the filmmaker and the Harold Lloyd persona in the film. Because Lloyd the filmmaker is, you know, making light, comic, ironic fun of the character and his boyish, you know, exuberance in what he thinks is power.
Yeah,
You know,
doing things that might well be obnoxious in life.
but contextualized here are wonderful. We cannot not mention, among riffs and all of that, the big riff and that takes place during the taxi sequence, and that's the arrival of Babe Ruth himself. Now, it's you know, for those who are not addicted to American sports, it's worth just pointing out that if Harold Lloyd is America's largest movie star in 1928, Babe Ruth is America's largest athletic star. Yeah, absolutely. So this is also you know, a very it shows how old a particular Hollywood game of celebrity use, you know, is, and where, because we all know at the one hand, we know how this is working in the story, and it's funny with his, you know, the obsession with the Yankees, and he gets the you know, Bambino, you know, in his taxi. But everybody also knows that they know the importance of the fan magazines. And this is its own kind of thing on this. Yeah, and now we're going to get these two biggest celebrities, because we know it is a taxi driver, but it is Harold Lloyd, and it is Babe Ruth who's playing Babe Ruth, but it really is Babe Ruth.
Yeah, Babe Ruth is only there to
be Babe Ruth.
Horrified at the speed at which Lloyd is driving the taxi.
And by the way, as we know, the particular day they shot Babe Ruth doing that, we do happen to know they were actually not shooting on the same set together, because all of those are all just reaction shots that were then edited in seamlessly as we have.
Well, like so many things in that sequence.
Right.
All of the managing of all of those high-speed chases through New York, which are all in different locations and going different directions.
Right, and I think let's mention the way in which, you know, they incorporate everything they did or they could use so seamlessly, including, I'm leading up, a crash.
Yeah. The streetcar was not intended to smash into the pole. And in fact, they narrowly avoided a very, very serious accident. But Lloyd invented a gag.
Exactly.
Involving, you know, turning the the manhole cover into a wheel, and you know.
And then yeah, and it fits seamlessly in the story and adds to the authenticity of the location at the same time.
Yeah, well, he was famous as an improviser originally. Right. When he was doing one-reel and two-reel movies, there was a tremendous amount of improvisation while they were shooting. I mean, obviously, a movie like Speedy is so technically elaborate.
Right.
I mean, they have all these special contraptions for filming the car chases with a camera up above the street to track what's going on and so on. But nevertheless, he was an improviser when necessary.
Okay. We're going to have to stop improvising this discussion now because we've actually run out of time. But that doesn't mean there's not a lot still to be said about this one marvelous, marvelous film.
Yeah.
If you'd like to know more about what we do here on City Cinematheque, there's a way to find out. Visit the website of CUNY TV. That's www.tv.cuny.edu. You'll find out about City Cinematheque, the other programming here at CUNY TV, ways to communicate with us by email, and something new and important, how you can download the CUNY TV app. And that means you can stream the station and our programming from any number of locations as long as you have that app. So visit your app store or our website to get that CUNY TV app. So that's www.tv.cuny.edu. Geoffrey, always a pleasure to chat about things with you.
Glad to be here.
Great. And I look forward to our next chat. And I look forward to the fact that you may tune in again and watch us doing what we do here on CUNY TV and City Cinematheque, and that's continuing to stroll through the archives of film history. But for now, it's goodbye.